Late summer, 1877. The Texas Panhandle baked in white sun, the air thin and dry as bone. Dust lifted behind the Butterfield coach as it rattled into Mesquite Ridge Depot and rolled to a stop beneath a warped tin awning. Heat shimmered above the rails. The platform smelled of hot pine and horse sweat of iron warmed past comfort. Ada Finch stepped down with care boots sinking into sifted dust. One hand pressed to her cheek where a birthmark rose like a river bend. The other closed around a letter that did not belong to her. The envelope said Annabelle Frey. It had brought Ada here anyway. A man waited beside a wagon, broad in the shoulders, shirt sleeves rolled, hat brim cutting the glare. He looked made for open country, the sort of man who squared himself against weather and never asked it to change. His eyes were steady. His hands were nicked with work. Mr. Hart Ada tried voice dry in her throat. He dipped his head the smallest nod. Jonah. I am not the pretty one you sent for, she said. It felt like putting a stone on the table and asking someone to look at the weight with her. His mouth found a thin, quiet smile that reached all the way to his gaze. You are enough. The words settled between them like a shaded place on a long road. He lifted her trunk into the wagon, then offered a hand. His palm was warm. His grip was sure and careful. He did not look away from her face. He did not flinch. They rode out of town with the wind combing the grass and the docked tails of cattle flicking flies in unison. The land opened toward the red rim of Palo Duro Canyon, its edges bitten by time. Mesquite stood dark and tough along the draws. Buzzards tilted high against a pale sky. They said little. She counted fence posts to hold her breath steady. He kept an eye on the horizon and the thawing line of distant heat. When he finally spoke, it was a simple thing. You came far. Chicago to Amarillo by rail, she said. Wagon after. He nodded. The wheels squeaked wood against iron. In the distance, a black speck crested a ridge and paused, then slid away along the skyline. Jonah's eyes narrowed and then softened again. Hart Range appeared as a smudge that grew into buildings. White fences sunburned. A 2-story house shouldered against the wind. Its shutters canted, its paint gone dull under years of light. It looked strong. It did not look welcoming. He pulled the team up at the steps. It stands, he said. Ada shaded her face and took in the yard. A bell with a cracked lip hung near the porch. A coil of rope lay coiled like a sleeping snake. The porch boards had a memory of someone's boots turning. They made it legal first. The county clerk's office sat behind a lopsided door that stuck at the sill. Inside, one fly traded corners with itself and lost. The clerk wore his vest open and wrote their names with slow, dry strokes. He thumbed the paper, squinted at the ink, then stamped. That is enough for the county. No ring, no preacher, no blessing. The room smelled of ink dust and a long afternoon. Back at the ranch, the house opened on a hall where light did not travel far. Floors creaked in a careful way. A single coat hung on a nail by the door. A pair of boots waited below it aligned. Someone lived here by habit, not invitation. In the kitchen, Mrs. Dalton lifted her eyes without lifting her chin. Tall, straight-backed gray hair twisted into a knot that had plans of its own. She took Ada in with one glance. A pot simmered. Bacon cooled on a plate, grease feathered like satin. The air had the salty sour of brine and the sweet hush of bread near done. Mrs. Dalton, Jonah said. Ada. The woman tipped her spoon. Not unkind, not warm. Supper is at 6. A young man crossed the back steps with a yoke on his shoulders. He set the buckets by the sink and nodded. Lou Carter, wet rope smell and river silt clung to him. Ada moved to wash her hands. I can peel potatoes, or sweep. Mrs. Dalton set the spoon in the bowl. The stove is particular. Best not burn yourself. Lou reached for the broom before Ada's fingers found it. Mr. Jonah does not like the lady of the house roughing her hands. I am not a lady of any house, Ada said. It came softer than she expected. Lou shifted eyes vague with the wish to help and the wish to obey. He left with the broom and an apology he did not have words for. Ada ate at the end of the table. No one had asked her to. No one told her not to. She kept her hands folded when she was not lifting the cup to her mouth. She watched the way Mrs. Dalton salted things with 2 taps from up high and how Lou leaned on one hip to save the good boot heel. Jonah left before the morning was fully born. He had said he was riding North Fence. He did not say when he would return. He did not look uncertain about the coming back. The house woke slow without him. Ada stood in her room and measured the window with her hands. The glass was clouded in its corners. When she opened it, the sash complained a long, dry moan, then released. Warm air slid over her cheek and lifted the hair at her neck. On the floor by the door, she found a small tin cup steam moving like a thin ghost above it. Coffee. Beside it, a wedge of cornbread wrapped in a clean rag. The cornbread wore a scratch of butter that had only just started to think of melting. She picked up the cup and held her breath. Someone knew where to place it so it would be found without fanfare. She took a walk along the porch while the light slanted pale. Boards sang under her weight. The yard held its silence like a question. A narrow door near the end of the hall was locked. She pressed her palm to the wood and felt only the cool refusal of old paint. In the parlor, a guitar leaned in a corner face dulled with dust. One string had snapped and hung like a vein across its body. She rested 2 fingers on the fretboard and felt the old groove of someone who had made the same shapes over and over until the wood learned them. On a side table lay a sealed envelope with red wax stamped deep. SP pressed clean into the surface. It waited as if patience could grow legs. Ada glanced toward the yard and then back to the letters, a prickle on her skin that had nothing to do with wind. She kept out of the way, because that was how one lasted in places that were not sure of you yet. She folded towels and left them on the chair. She stacked plates a little neater in the cupboard the way she had seen nuns do it. Mrs. Dalton came behind and moved the plates back to their old positions with a soft click that did not rise to the level of reproach. Before supper, Ada reached for a shawl on the banister and felt the weave under her fingers. She paused. It was not hers. It was the size she would have chosen if asked. She held it up, and the wool smelled faintly of cedar. The shawl belonged in the house and to her both, and somehow that did not argue. Night came with a thin moon and coyotes far off their talk, a braid of sharp sound. Lou laughed low with someone near the barn. The scrape of a rake kept time. Lamps put a dull gold on the windows and kept the dark at a place just past the yard gate. Ada went to the kitchen for water. The parlor lamp still burned. Jonah sat at the table with his head bent and both hands occupied. He was sewing the hem of a coat that had torn. The needle rose and fell steady as a pulse. His scarred hand worked as sure as the other, smooth, then pull, then smooth. "You do not have to," Ada said. "It needed doing," he answered without looking up. His voice had a worn edge, a kindness and a distance braided together. She stood in the doorway, cool glass hidden in both palms. She watched the thread run out and the new one tie itself in the small knot, tucked so neat it could hide in daylight. "Is this house used to strangers?" she asked. "It is used to storms," he said. He bit the thread and set the coat aside. His eyes found hers, then moved past to the window. Storms do not stay. Rain did not come. Wind did thin and constant, the kind that sings through nail holes and finds the seam in a door. Ada lay awake and listened to the house list its own noises. Stairs settling. A shutter moving 1 inch from where someone wanted it. Somewhere a mouse practicing a crime. She slept and woke, and slept again, and each time the shape of the room had become more true. Morning brought another cup of coffee outside her door, still warm. Another wedge of cornbread, a small folded paper under the cup. Seed packets, bluebonnet. The print was tiny and careful. She walked the yard with the seeds in her pocket and found a place near the porch where the soil gave. Kneeling felt like asking permission. A little wind lifted her skirt against her ankles. She pushed a finger into the ground and set the future inside it without saying a word. By afternoon, the sky turned the color of a tin bucket. Heat held heavy and reluctant. Ada returned to the parlor and touched the guitar again. She tried the tuning peg. The snapped string twanged a half note that was only a memory and a sting. She bent to it, curious to see if the knot might relearn itself for her. The string released and bit her fingertip. She jerked back. A small bead of red rose quietly to the surface. Outside, a single hoofbeat sounded on the hard road, then another, slow and deliberate, like someone who knew his way to a place without needing to think about it. Ada looked toward the porch. The bell near the steps held its breath and did not ring. She lifted her hand and pressed that small, blooded finger against her skirt until the color disappeared. The hoofbeat came again, closer, now measured as the tick of a clock you did not know you possessed. She stood very still and listened. The hoofbeat stopped short of the steps. The horse blew through its nose and rattled the bit. Ada stood in the doorway with one hand on the jam, listening to the quiet that follows travel. Dust moved in the light like fine thread. A man in a canvas coat sat his saddle and lifted 2 sacks from the pack animal behind him. Feed pellets. He tipped his hat when he saw Ada and turned toward the barn. Jonah came up from the corral, took the sacks without speech, and set them where Lou pointed. The 2 men nodded to each other the way people do when the work answers most questions. The rider drank from a tin, wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist, then swung up again. The horse fell into a careful trot, and the sound of hooves thinned into the big air. The bell by the porch did not ring. Ada let her fingers slide down the jam and stepped back inside. Morning settled into a shape. There was always a cup waiting by her door, the steam still rising when she bent to it. Cornbread that kept its heat where butter touched. A folded cloth she could carry without burning her hand. She found herself standing in the hall with the cup in both palms, breathing its warmth before she drank. She folded the cloth again, placed it on the banister, then smoothed the wrinkle her thumb had made. She tried to help in the kitchen. Mrs. Dalton shook her head without looking up from the skillet. The bacon crackled, and the smell filled every corner. The older woman lifted the pan, tilted it, and let the fat pour into a jar like honey. The stove had the temper of a mule. Ada reached for a sack of flour and felt a light touch at her wrist. Mrs. Dalton moved the sack to a different shelf and said only, "It lives here." Lou came in with the morning buckets and set them down with a hollow slap. He grinned without showing teeth when Ada reached for the broom. He had straw stuck to his sleeve and the damp smell of the pump on his shirt. "Let me," he said, and he meant it to be kind. He gathered up the broom and was gone again in 3 long steps. Ada looked at the space the broom had left and found nothing to do with her hands. She learned the house by sound. The door near the end of the hall hummed like a hive when wind pressed it. The parlor held the echo of a voice that did not belong to her and did not show itself. The guitar slept with dust on its face. She blew on the strings and watched the dust rise and settle again. By noon she had cut thin curtains from a striped cotton hand stitches, so small they disappeared unless you leaned close. She washed the glass with vinegar and a rag until the light came clean through and made bright ovals on the floorboards. Mrs. Dalton, passing, paused and made the smallest sound that might have been approval or simply surprise. She did not move the curtains back to the cupboard. She touched the hem, felt the weight of the cloth between 2 fingers, and walked on. Ada took the seed packets from her pocket, bluebonnet. The paper crackled like a secret. Out by the porch, she pressed her fingers into warm soil and dropped the seeds into the small dark she made. Wind lifted her hair and the hem of her skirt. She tamped the ground with the side of her palm. When she stood, she felt grit on her knees and the ache of a simple thing done. That evening, when the porch took on its amber color and the land went quiet around the edges, she carried the guitar to the table. She cleaned the old varnish with a soft cloth and spit when the bottle of oil she needed could not be found. The snap string rattled against the bridge. She needed length and a knot that would hold. Lou came to the doorway and leaned his shoulder on the frame. "You play." He did not ask. "Used to," she said. She looked up at him. "Do you have a bit of line? Fishing, not fence." Lou disappeared and came back with a length of clear line wound around 2 fingers. He held it out without stepping into the room. "Try that. Takes a knot fine." "Thank you," she said. She felt the line between finger and thumb. It had the memory of a river in it, cool, though the day had been hot. She threaded the new length through the hole and tied a double. The peg turned with a dry groan. She pulled until the string rose and found a note. The first chord was wrong and then less wrong. The third tried to be a song. She let it fill the room without looking to see if anyone was listening. She did not look, but someone was. Jonah paused in the hall and stood in the place where the shadow from the window cut his boots in 2. He did not come in. His hat tilted in his hand. He watched her fingers find the next shape, and something in his face eased that had not eased since the train pulled in. The next day she walked to Mesquite Chapel with the guitar by the neck. The bell on its white frame had a hairline crack that did not stop it being a bell. Children ran ahead of her with ribbons tied to their wrists, making small flags of color against the sun. The preacher's wife, Mrs. Hollis, had a basket on her arm and a face that was kind first and practical second. She asked Ada if she would show the little ones a tune. Ada said yes before she had planned to. They gathered under a sycamore that spread shade like a blanket. Ada set the guitar on her knee and tuned by ear until the strings agreed. She showed them how to clap on the 2 and the 4. She taught them a reel she had learned in a place with damp stone walls and a nun who hid a laugh in the corner of her mouth. The children stamped and clapped and sang a verse too loud and then softer when she raised her eyebrows and smiled. Their voices carried down the road and touched the storefronts with something that sounded like a window opened. Across the way, Jonah stood at a fence post that did not need his attention and watched with his head turned just so. He took off his hat and wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. When a boy kicked dust on his boots, he stepped aside and let the dust fall harmless. He held himself as if he would not interrupt a thing that was finally going right. Ada walked home with the guitar lighter than when she had left. At the ranch, she set an oil lamp on the kitchen sill and lit it at dusk. Flame caught at the wick and made a calm circle where there had been none. The room changed color. She took that as permission and set another lamp on the parlor table. She did not speak to ask if it was allowed. Mrs. Dalton did not say it was not. In the hall, she found a second pillow left on the chair by her door. It matched nothing in the room, and yet belonged. She pressed her palm to it and felt the give. When she lifted it to her face, she caught the clean of cedar, a scent that always knows its way back to wood. On the banister, her shawl hung with its hem newly finished. The stitch closed the tear in a way her eye could not find unless she knew where to look. On the third morning, she took a tin plate and breadcloth and walked to the north pasture. The sun pulled sweat out of the earth. Locusts started their saw music. The field faded into far and then into nothing. Jonah was at the fence where wire runs meet and curl into a fist. He worked with cutters and a leather glove on his left hand. The glove was old and thin in the palm. He did not look up until her shadow touched his boots. "Brought you something," she said. He wiped his forehead and nodded. "Thank you." She poured water into the tin. The sound of it hitting and then settling was a sound a person could rest inside for a moment. He ate standing, turned toward the fence so the crumbs would not fall into the cut grass where a horse might eat them. He kept his eyes on the wire. Now and then he looked past her shoulder at the line of land as if it had a face and he knew it. Ada noticed the scar under the cuff before he pulled the glove back on. A pale rope, thick as a finger, curving where other people have smooth skin. She looked away like she had seen a man without his hat and did not want him to be embarrassed. He said nothing, and she did not force words into the silence. She handed him the water again, and he took it. On her way back, she cut through the lower field. Grass brushed the sides of her skirt and left seeds that clung to the thread. She carried the empty tin in one hand and the cloth in the other. The sky held its flat color a lid on a pot that had not yet boiled. She stopped to pour water on the small patch of soil where she had set the seeds. The ground took the drink and turned darker. A breeze moved along the porch, and the new curtains shifted like someone breathing in sleep. The lamp on the sill was cold and clear, now glass clean as a pond before a throw. In the parlor, the envelope with red wax still lay where she had first seen it. SP were the letters sunk into the seal. She touched them and found that the wax was harder than it looked. She put the envelope back where it was and wiped the table with her sleeve where a circle of dust had grown around it. Lou called from the yard for someone to hold a gate. Ada took the path to the barn. The smell of hay lived in the rafters, and the warmth of animals moved in the air even with no animal near. She set the tin down on a barrel and pushed the gate while Lou swung it into place with a chain. "Thank you," he said, and the chain caught with a clean click. Ada smiled and went to the pump. The handle stuck for a second and then water came thin, then strong. She filled the tin. The weight fit her hand. She turned toward the house. A sharp metallic twang cut across the field. It rode in on the wind, thin and hard, and snapped the quiet in two. Ada froze. The tin slipped, hit the packed earth, and rolled. Water flared and found the dust. The sound came again. It was barbed wire under strain, breaking free in a sudden song that had no music in it at all. The sound ripped the air a third time. Ada ran. The grass slapped her skirt. She went past the pump and the low fence and found Jonah at the north line where two posts leaned toward each other. The barbed wire had snapped and a coil hung like a snake that had forgotten its own shape. Blood showed at his sleeve, and then more of it dark where it soaked in. He said, "I am fine," and took a step back that put him against the post. His mouth tightened. The glove on his left hand was cut through threads standing like whiskers. Ada reached without asking. "Sit," she said, and pointed to the low brace where two rails crossed. He did not sit. She took his wrist and felt the tremor there. Jonah sit. He did. She tore her apron with a sharp pull, then went for the tin of whiskey she had brought in her basket more for courage than for use. The cork took time. The smell rose into the heat and mixed with dust and iron. "This will sting," she said. "It already does." She poured. He drew his breath through his teeth. The liquid ran pink and then clear. Under the cut, the old scar showed itself a pale rope that wound up his forearm and disappeared under the rolled sleeve. The skin around it was smooth and new compared to that one hurt. She had the sense that a fire had once tried to claim him and had only gotten apart before it ran out of appetite. She wrapped the strip of apron and tied it firm. He watched her hands and kept his eyes off her face. The wire sang once in a small, tired way when the breeze moved it. "That scar," she said, "it is not from today." "No." He lifted his arm and turned it so the light found the long, pale line. "House in San Antonio." Kitchen went up. He ran his tongue along his teeth as if checking for words. "I pulled a girl out. She was not mine to pull. Not yet." The name came out flat. Evelyn Ward. St. Louis after. She wanted scenes and light and a man who did not smell like horses. She wanted my hand to match the other. He let his sleeve fall. The glove went back on. Ada tied the knot again and tucked the end so it would not catch. "You saved someone," she said. He gave one small sound that might have been a laugh without humor in it. "I saved her once, not from what she wanted. We do not choose the marks," she said, "only how we carry them." He looked at her then, not at the cut, not at the ground. At her mouth where the words had come from, and at her eyes steady. His own gaze steadied. He nodded. She walked with him back to the yard. Lou came from the barn at a run with a roll of wire and a coil of care in his face. Mrs. Dalton stood in the kitchen door and gripped the frame as if it might step away if she did not hold on. No one spoke until Jonah reached the porch and sat. Ada washed the basin clean and poured out the red water on the dry edge where nothing grew. That night, thin rain found its voice on the roof. Ada woke and went to the porch in her stockings, a shawl thrown over her shoulders. Jonah sat at the little bench by the door with the guitar across his lap. He had tuned it by ear and by memory. The new line Lou had brought ran along the bridge clear as river glass. His fingers were slow at first, then grew certain. The melody was old and simple, and it held a softness he did not show in daylight. Ada sat on the steps. She did not speak. She watched his left hand, the scarred one, move and not hesitate. Rain made a fine curtain between them and the yard. The lamp behind the window threw an amber slice on his cheek. The song ended before it wanted to, and ended right all the same. Jonah set the guitar down and leaned it against the door. He kept his eyes on the yard where the rain turned the dust to the color of coffee with milk. Morning found the house true to itself and a little different. Ada reached for the latch on her room and touched wood she did not know. A narrow door had been fitted into the wall that once held only boards and paint. It opened to the porch. Morning light came through glass that had not been there yesterday and reached the floor in a white spill. There was a faint smell of cut cedar and planed pine. The hinges moved without complaint. She stepped through the new door and stood with the sun on her toes. Jonah came down the hall with his hat in his hand. He did not stop. He looked at the sky, then at her, then at the small project that had appeared in the night. "Morning is kind here," he said. "Thought you might like it." "Thank you." He touched the brim and went past to the yard. The quiet that followed had a different shape than before. Ada went to her bed and sat. She could see the blue of the sky from where her pillow lay now. For a moment she put her hand on the doorframe, felt the small nail set flush with the wood, and the place where a knuckle might fit when someone stood watching the day begin. Later, with the light thin and the air holding heat close to the ground, Ada took the small trowel and went to the patch where she had set the seeds. She scratched the surface, and the smell of wet earth came up like a promise no one had asked for. She watered and stood. Hoofbeats sounded on the road in a steady, slow measure. Not Lou, not any of the hands. A horse that had been ridden hard on purpose and then held back at the last so it could arrive cool. Ada looked up. A man in a black coat brought his horse to the gate and let it think. He had a face made of angles and a mouth that liked a straight line. He saw her and smiled a thin smile that did not rise to his eyes. "Miss Finch," he said, "took a long ride to find you." She did not answer. Jonah came from the barn with his rag in his hand and fence smell on his shirt. He slowed when he saw the man, and something in his shoulders shifted that would only be felt by those who watched him every day. The rider dismounted. He looped the rein and patted his horse without looking at it. The animal flicked one ear and then went still. The man took a folded packet from his coat and tapped it once with a forefinger. "Silas Pike," he said, and the name fit him. "Appointed overseer of the late Preston Vale's loose ends. That would include you, Miss Finch." He lifted the packet, so the seal caught the light. "You were registered in Mr. Vale's books as collateral for a debt he could not settle. That makes your marriage a legal question." Ada heard the words as shapes that would not hold. Air turned thin. Jonah folded the rag and put it on the post beside him. He walked until he stood between Ada and the visitor. He did not say Ada's name. He did not say the man's. He spoke without heat. "You can turn around and ride back the way you came." Silas Pike smiled again and let the packet open a little. The paper showed ink and a clerk's hand. He waited. "I have the law." "No," Jonah said. "You have paper." His voice stayed low. "You have 2 minutes to leave this land." Mrs. Dalton had come to the kitchen door. Lou stood near the well, hands loose at his side's hat in his palm. No one moved closer. The yard put all its attention on the three of them and held it there. Silas looked at the house, at the porch, at the lock that had changed on a new door. He cocked his head. He stepped 1 pace nearer. The horse shifted a hoof and stamped at a fly. Jonah took 1 step that closed the space Silas had tried to open. He did not set his jaw. His eyes had gone quiet and cold. The look said what the words did not risk. The look said this road had an end, and it was right here. Silas Pike's smile broke and then returned smaller. "Mark my name," he said. He folded the packet. He took the rein. He put his boot in the stirrup and swung up. He did not turn his back on them as he settled into the saddle. He backed the horse 3 steps before he let it wheel. The hooves made a hollow sound on the hard pack. Dust rose and laid down again. The bell by the steps did not speak. Ada stood with her hand on the small new latch until her knuckles went white. Jonah did not touch her. He did not look at her. He kept himself between her and the road until the rider had gone past the cottonwoods and the sound of the horse had become part of the air. Inside the envelope with the red wax waited where it had been since the day she arrived. SP pressed clean into the seal. Ada picked it up and put it down again. Her hands left a print in the dust like 2 small leaves. Lou went back to the barn and fell into work with the care of a man who has nothing to say that would help. Mrs. Dalton closed the kitchen door that had stood half open for air. Ada sat on the step of the new doorway and watched the patch of dirt where she had set the seeds. The ground showed no green yet. Wind moved through the mesquite and brought the smell of distance. In the parlor, the guitar stood where Jonah had left it, the new line holding true. Clouds stacked on the far rim like cattle along a fence. The day pressed its palm to the land and held it there. By noon the air felt close, and the scent of rain came up from nothing the way a letter holds perfume long after the person is gone. Horses at the corral tossed their heads and showed the whites of their eyes. Jonah moved along the rails, untying ropes and calming the young ones with a palm on the shoulder. Lou ran the line that would take the jumpiest into the small pen. The sky grumbled. The sound rolled in from the canyon and shook the porch boards under Ada's feet. She set the oil lamp off the sill and onto the floor so it would not tip. She dropped the latch on the new door and crossed the yard, fast skirts caught at the knee. Wind lifted grit into her face. She tasted salt and dust. A colt flinched at thunder and came round hard. Jonah pulled the lead short and turned his body to take the kick where it could do least harm. The hoof struck his shoulder. He staggered and hit the post with his hip. He pulled the colt through the gate and freed the rope with one hand while the other arm hung useless. Ada reached him as the first fat drops fell. The smell of rain hit like a memory. "You are bleeding," she said. "It is nothing. It is not nothing." She took his good arm over her shoulder and felt the weight of him. He let her lead him toward the house and did not argue again. Inside the kitchen, took them in. Mrs. Dalton swept crumbs aside like clearing a battlefield. Lou brought the tin of whiskey without being told. Ada set Jonah in the chair by the hearth and cut the shirt where the cloth had glued itself to the wound. "This will sting," she said. He set his jaw. "Do it." She poured. The whiskey made the cut shine and then go dull. Blood came and then slowed under her hand. She cleaned around the torn skin and saw bruising already flower under the surface. She wrapped him tight with clean linen. Her fingers worked quick and sure. Her breath came even, only her throat showed a pulse. Jonah watched her face while she worked. His eyes held a look she had not seen on him and did not know how to name. When she tied the knot, he reached with his unhurt hand and took hers palm against palm, warm and rough. "You were never second best," he said. "I should have said that before." Ada lifted her eyes. The rain had gentled and was talking along the porch. The old clock in the hall ticked small and stubborn. "Thank you," she said. He let her hand go. He sat back and closed his eyes for a breath, as if the chair might hold him up a little longer than he deserved. Mrs. Dalton ladled broth into a cup and set it on the table. Her mouth was its usual firm line, and yet there was something in the way she put the spoon down that did not match the shape of the line at all. Lou stood in the doorway like a fence post and looked at everything except Jonah's shoulder. By evening the storm had run itself thin. Puddles showed the sky in small broken pieces. Jonah slept on the settee with his arm tied to his side. Ada sat at the table with the guitar in her lap and played soft notes low as talk by a sickbed. The tune found a steady path and walked it. Later in the dim of the hall, Mrs. Dalton spoke hardly above a whisper. "Pike has friends with badges. Deputy Harlan plays cards with him." She looked at the red wax envelope on the parlor table and then away. Paper is a sharp thing when men want it to be. Ada nodded. She could feel the shape of fear inside her chest and the shape of something standing up next to it. She put another log on the small fire and settled the screen. She turned the wick down on the lamp until it hummed. In the morning, Jonah went out slow and returned slower. His shoulder made him careful in ways he did not like being seen. He said little, but the quiet seemed to travel with less weight. Ada baked until the kitchen smelled like heat and sugar. She called on Mrs. Hollis for jars. The preacher's wife sent 2 neighbor girls with their sleeves rolled and a joke ready, and the girls stayed to help until their braids came loose. Jonah appeared in the doorway at sundown with his hat in his hands. There was a look on his face that moved between doubt and resolve and found a place to rest. "The porch is bare," he said. "It wants light." They strung lanterns from the eaves. Jonah sanded the long table until his shoulder complained and then sanded more. Lou pulled benches out of the barn that had not seen rain since spring. Ada wiped each plank with a cloth wet with vinegar and water until the grain ran dark and clean. Jonah climbed a stool and dropped oil on the pin of the bell by the steps. He swung it, and the bell spoke once low and honest. The sound settled into the yard like a new rule. People arrived with covered dishes and jars that glowed with fruit under syrup. Dresses were let out a seam to suit the air. Shirts were brushed. Faces were open. Children ran and made noise that did not feel like a threat to anything. Ada greeted them by name when she could, and by smile when she could not. She set pies here and cornbread there and a ham in a place where everyone could get to it without crowding. She moved through the press of bodies and the heat of breath and felt the space open for her rather than close. Mrs. Dalton poured coffee and did not direct. Lou told 2 jokes without a proper punch and was forgiven both times. Jonah did not speak much. He refilled pitchers. He lifted a tray when it seemed too heavy for the girl who carried it. He righted a chair after a child had knocked it over. His eyes tracked Ada the way a man tracks weather that finally suits his field. When the tables had been cleared and the little ones were heavy with food and song, Ada took the guitar. She sat on the top step of the porch and played a tune for dancing. The first claps were shy. Then the rhythm took and boots hit dirt and skirts swung. The lantern light made halos on the hair of anyone who passed close to it. The wind came soft through the cottonwoods and turned the flame heads without trouble in them. The song fell away and left its echo. Jonah stepped up one step and set his hat beside the rail. He turned toward the crowd, and it quieted without being asked. He had the small, boxy look of a man who does not like speaking to a circle of faces and will do it anyway. "I did not get the bride I sent for," he said. "I got Ada." He reached into his pocket. The ring he held had a thin gold band gone soft at the edges. "My mother wore this." He looked at Ada, and something in the air changed. "You came here with a letter that did not say your name. You stayed with a house that did not know how to speak to you. You made it learn. If you will have me, I would like to do this right." He went to one knee. The sound in the yard was the sound a breath makes when it gathers itself. Ada stood, her hands found each other and then let go. She stepped down one stair. "Yes," she said. The word was not a shout. It did not need to be. He slid the ring on her finger. It fit like it had been waiting without impatience. He stood and took her in his arms. They did not linger long there in front of everyone. They stood long enough. There were small noises, a laugh that broke because it tried too hard not to, a sniff, the scrape of a chair leg when someone shifted for a better look and then remembered themselves. Mrs. Dalton dabbed at the corner of her eye and then made a face at herself for it. Ada felt the weight of the ring and the heat of Jonah's hand and the porch under her feet and the air on her throat. She could see the sliver of the new door out of the corner of her eye and the brighter square it made on the floor inside. They ate again. Someone produced a fiddle and tried it until it agreed to be in tune. Children danced for candy wrapped in paper. Ada rested the guitar on her knee and played a low line for whoever needed it. When the last wagon turned down the road and the jar lids clicked back into place and silence started to build itself up from the edges, Jonah stood by the porch rail. The lanterns hissed down one by one as Lou pinched them. The air cooled. Somewhere, a night bird called. On the far path, a set of wheels moved slow, a buggy careful in the ruts. It came along the fence and turned into the yard. The horse blew once and shook its mane. The bell by the step gave a single clear note and fell quiet. The buggy held two figures, Reverend Hollis with his hat set straight and Sheriff Lane with his jacket unbuttoned and his badge dull from use. The horse stood blowing and shook the bridle as if to remind someone it had done the work. Evening held its breath. Jonah met them at the steps with his hand on the porch rail. "Reverend," he said. "Sheriff." Reverend Hollis smiled at Ada as if he had been waiting to see her all along. Mrs. Hollis said there was music. She was not wrong. I heard the last of it before the road turned. Sheriff Lane studied the yard. His gaze took in the lanterns, the faces that still lingered the bell with oil fresh in its cup. He held a paper folded once and then again. He touched two fingers to the brim of his hat at Ada, then looked at Jonah. "Silas Pike," he said. "We all know the name." He fanned the paper open and let the seal hang in the light. The red wax had been broken clean and the letters were nothing but a memory pressed in a round. Mr. Vale kept sloppy books. He wrote things he had no standing to write. "Miss Finch is of age. Your registration with the clerk is sound." He tapped the corner where the stamp had bitten. "If Pike troubles you, send him to me." Jonah's shoulders did not move, but something in him settled. "Thank you, Sheriff." The sheriff folded the paper as if that ended it and slid it away. "I am off duty for Pye," he said. He looked at Reverend Hollis. "You are working." Reverend Hollis laughed once. "Pye will improve my sermon as much as your law." Then he cleared his throat. "I was told there was a promise to bless." The last of the neighbors drifted closer again without quite forming a circle. Children leaned into mothers. Lou wiped his hands on his pants and found a place by the gate. Mrs. Dalton stood near the kitchen door with her chin set and her eyes not far from wet. Reverend Hollis asked Jonah and Ada if the porch would do. Jonah shook his head. He looked toward the cottonwood behind the house where the ground went soft and the sky opened wider. There, he said, They walked out together, lantern light chasing them to the edge of the yard and field light taking over. The cottonwood stood with its wide arms and the sound of leaves like slow rain. Someone brought quilts and laid them over bales. Someone else carried the lanterns across and hung them on low branches until the tree wore small suns. Ada stood facing Jonah with the smell of cut grass and oil and warm iron held in the night air. Her dress was plain. Her fingers carried the weight of the ring he had put there an hour before. The faint sound of a fiddle tuning drifted and stopped. Reverend Hollis spoke only enough. 2 names, 2 hands. He looked from one to the other and let silence do its share. When he nodded to Jonah, Jonah took a breath and let it go. "I do not have fancy words," he said. "I can stand here. I can stand here when it is bright and when it is not." He looked at Ada and did not look away. "I can lift what needs lifting. I can be quiet when quiet is best. I will not set my back to you." Ada felt her throat pull tight and loosen again. She watched his face in the lantern wash and the lines around his eyes that came from sun and hard days. She spoke with the steadiness she had found while nursing him in the kitchen and in all the mornings with coffee on the floor. "I came here by mistake," she said. "I stayed because I wanted to. I will stay like this. Honest. Untidy when life is that way. I will not pretend to be someone else. If I am quiet, know I am listening." Reverend Hollis nodded, and that was all. He blessed them for as long as it takes to breathe once. He told Jonah he could kiss his bride. He told Ada the same. They stepped into each other, and it was simple. Their mouths met. Their hands rested easy. The cottonwood leaves went on moving, and the lanterns burned without flicker. When they walked back toward the porch, there were no cheers. The sound was softer. People cleared their throats and smiled with their whole faces. Someone laughed under their breath because they had to let something out. Sheriff Lane clapped Jonah on the shoulder with care for the bandage, and Reverend Hollis claimed a plate he had been promised. The night thinned. Wagons took the lane one at a time, and the bell answered each with a low note as wheels hit the stone by the steps. Lou carried the fiddle to the kitchen so the dew would not catch it. Mrs. Dalton stacked plates with a speed that said she would not have the house waking to a mess. Ada saw her pause only once to touch the new door with 2 fingers, as if to make sure it was real. When the last lamp outside had been pinched and the yard had gone to dark, Ada stood in the bedroom with the window open and the curtain breathing in and out in the small wind. The mirror held the room where it was and doubled her there. She let herself look. The birthmark on her cheek was the shape it had always been. Light from the new door fell long across the floorboards and climbed one side of the dresser like water rising. Jonah came in quiet. His reflection reached hers before he did a tall figure behind her shoulder. He set his hands at her waist and did not press. He looked at her in the glass and then lowered his chin to the top of her head. "Do you still think I sent for the wrong bride?" he said. She lifted her hand to cover his where it lay at her middle. She looked at their hands together and the pale mark of his old burn and the nick that the wire had left by the bandage. "No," she said. "We have the right person. Both of us." He turned his head and kissed the place where her hair met her temple. The sound from outside slid through the open window. Crickets. A coyote a long way off. The bell stirred once and then settled. They did not speak for a time. They let the room tell them what it had learned. Cedar in the shawl on the chair. Fresh plain pine in the new door. Bread in the air from where Mrs. Dalton had left 2 loaves cooling because she did not trust morning to be patient. The guitar waited in the parlor strings and tune neck, catching the light. Later they stepped out onto the porch through the door that had not existed before. The boards felt warm still from all the feet that had crossed them. The yard was a quiet place that did not need to be won. Ada sat on the top step and set the guitar on her knee. Jonah sat beside her and watched her hands with a face that did not try to hide what it felt. She played low so the night could keep its shape. A simple melody that knew where to begin and where to end. When she lifted her fingers, the last note hung and disappeared like a small moth finding dark. They went inside. Jonah held the door for her, and the square of light slid across the floor ahead of them as if it knew the way. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.